back, everyone. In today's video, we're sharing the most common interview mistakes and how to avoid them. So, Peter, you've done the work, your resume's great, you found the job that you really want, you get the interview scheduled. What a terrible time it would be to blow the opportunity. So, we don't want anyone to do that. Where should we start with making sure that everyone has the best chance of getting the job offer when they get to the interview stage?
Show up on time to your interview. Showing up late is an easy way to make a bad impression with a manager that you've just met. So if you can show up on time or even early, it's gonna help your chances. Make sure that you are scoping out the location if it's an unfamiliar area. Do anything you can to make sure that you are early to your interview and that you are not walking in the door 15 minutes late.
You said the keyword impression, and we all know you only get one chance at that, especially in an interview situation where you have to assume it's competitive. You want to represent yourself in the best possible way, and showing up late is a deal killer. From our experience being in recruiting a long time, we can tell anyone listening that many companies who are hiring will automatically exclude a candidate who shows up late for their interview. So, be on time. The next one is dress appropriately. This is also something completely in your control. And if you don't have proper clothes, I will say find someone to borrow them from. It's worth putting forth the effort to show up dressed professionally.
And that's always an easy one in my mind because when in doubt, go above. So if you aren't sure what the dress code is for the company, it's always better to dress a little bit better than your interviewer than a little bit worse. So that includes wearing a suit if you're a guy, just professional dress clothes for a woman, a skirt, professional blouse. All of those things are kind of good defaults to fall back on unless you're certain that it's a really casual atmosphere and they've explicitly stated, hey, you can dress a little bit more casual, in which case I'd say for a guy, something like a polo, maybe some khaki pants, but I wouldn't go lower than.
The main thing here to consider is don't assume. Don't assume just because they're business casual that it's appropriate to show up that way for the interview. Go in the opposite direction. All I'll say, and this is a little old school, but there's never going to be a penalty for doing this. Show up with a suit, right? Show up in formal business attire. That will never fail you in an interview situation. All right, Peter, what's next?
This kind of actually piggybacks on what we just talked about is a mistake that a lot of people make is failing to research the company. So learning about them, learning about their dress code, their culture, all of those things kind of fall into this bucket here. So make sure that you are going to the company's website. You're learning about any recent press releases or news that they've made. You're learning about what sort of initiatives they're working on. You're learning about what the company actually does. You'd be surprised how many candidates show up to interviews and don't really even know about the company they're interviewing for. So make sure that you are not one of them.
And to complement that, research the interviewer or interviewers if there's more than one. Ask the person, whoever is setting the interview up for you, whether it's a recruiter or a hiring manager, who you're going to be interviewing with that day, and then look them up on LinkedIn. Learn about them. See if you have a common connection. That can make a huge difference in building rapport in an interview situation. Research the interviewer before you go. Too many candidates don't do that.
To stay in line with this, make sure that you know the job that you are interviewing for. This is a really simple one and it may seem silly, but make sure that you are looking at the job description, that you're learning about all of the bullet points that are expected of you. All of the things on the job description are fair game for the interview, and you can be expected to speak about them, answer questions about them. So make sure you fully understand the actual position that you are speaking about.
And you said that it goes without saying, and you would think that would be the case for something like this. But there's often a time lapse between when you first see a job description, apply for the job, and then go through the recruiting process of and then getting that interview set up. Days, weeks, sometimes even a month or more can go by. So it's way more common than you think it would be for a candidate to not refer back to the original job description on the day of the interview. But it's something that will definitely get you in trouble if you get caught off guard. And to complement that real quickly, I'll say make sure that you review your resume in advance too, because if something is on your resume, you absolutely need to be prepared to talk about it. And most of the time, whoever's interviewing you is going to have your resume in front of them and they'll ask you questions about it. So make sure you review those two things.
Another thing that I find happens frequently for perhaps new interviewees anybody who is not used to interviewing a lot is being unprepared for common interview questions. There are tons and tons of pages online. We at ZenGig have checklists, we have blogs on it. You can find lots of information out there about common interview questions and the types of answers that an interviewer is looking for. So make sure you're prepared for those. Obviously, your interview is going to be unique to you. It's going to have questions that are unique to you, but having a general idea of what types of answers you want to give for these kind of buckets that the questions fall into is going to go a long way to making you feel prepared and shining on that day.
It's just good practice to do. It'll make you so much more comfortable walking in when these things are fresh in your mind. And we have about 70 common interview questions that we see asked over and over that are on zengig.com. So check that out for sure, like Peter referenced. And not only do we have what the interviewer is looking for in terms of how you should answer, how you should approach structuring your answer, we also give some samples to refer to as well. So that's an important one.
We talk to a lot of candidates out there. What is something that you recommend that's often overlooked for candidates?
Well, don't dominate the conversation. Now, that may seem like a surprise because you're there to interview, you're there to talk about yourself, but you don't want to ramble. That can bore your audience. And one of the things that you should do is try to get a feel for how what you're saying is being received. Look at their facial expressions, look at their body language of the interviewers, and see, is what I'm saying going well? Is it being well received? Is it resonating? And if it's not, consider taking a little bit of a different route and cutting your answers shorter. But you'll pick up on these cues if you look for them. Things like head nods, right? And are they writing things down? Are they engaged in the conversation? You have to keep them engaged throughout. And so if you ramble too much, it's a quick way to lose your interviewer.
So this goes kind of what Pete was just saying, but make sure that you aren't oversharing. A lot of times interviews, they come across as very casual. If you get a really good interviewer, they're going to make you feel comfortable. You're going to be talking back and forth. A good interview, honestly, should feel like a conversation. It shouldn't feel like an interview. But the flip side of that is that it's easy to get lulled into a false sense of security and if you feel nervous, to ramble on, like Pete was saying, and to overshare about things that are maybe unrelated to the interview. You do want to keep in mind that this is still an interview and you were trying to impress the interviewer. So don't go too far into that. It's good to have a good rapport back and forth, but make sure that you're keeping it in check.
It's a conversation with someone, but that someone's not your friend. That's what you have to keep in check with this. They are judging you. Now, on the other hand, don't get too distracted if you make a mistake. Mistakes happen. They're almost inevitable in an interview. And every interviewer knows that, believe it or not. And I'll say even further that most interviewers are just as nervous as the candidate. It happens a surprising amount of time. Most people aren't really comfortable interviewing. It's not something they do all the time. So they want to make a good impression on you as a candidate as well. Don't forget that. So when you make a mistake, apologize for it. Ask, say that you need to start over if you need to. You want to revise your answer a little bit. You misspoke. All of these things are okay. Correcting yourself is much better than ignoring a mistake and leaving the interview because you won't have a chance to fix it later. So don't sweat it if that happens. It's very common and it's not going to knock you out of contention.
Definitely don't let one little mistake throw off your entire vibe of the interview. Just move on with it. Keep going. Try to keep your mindset positive. So speaking of positive, it's always a good idea to avoid bad mouthing or speaking negatively about past employers. That is something that is generally frowned upon by all people who are doing interviews. You don't want to talk to a candidate and then they ask them about their previous roles. Even if it was a bad experience for you, just keep it short. Keep it, we parted ways, that type of thing. You don't need to go into all of the gory details of how you hated this person or how you didn't like this person or how it was a bad job.
And make no mistake, they'll let you go on and talk about your former employer in a bad light. You could say they'll let you hang yourself, so to speak, with that. But don't let that happen. There's never a good reason to do it. No matter, as Peter said, no matter how angry you might feel about who you worked for in the past, it's not going to go over well. And the biggest reason is because they'll assume that you may talk about them someday. And that's reason enough to not take a chance on you as a candidate.
It's easy in a high stress interview situation to get mental fatigue and to zone out. But this is something you need to fight. And this is an area where you can easily make a bad impression on an interviewer. It's if they're telling a boring story or going on about something unrelated, perhaps the interview has run a really long time and you're just starting to get simply tired. You have to fight that. It's not, there's no worse look than asking an interviewer to repeat a question because you weren't paying attention. So make sure you are staying present and that you are paying attention to everything that is happening in that interview.
Peter, are we still recording? Are we still doing this? See, that's an example of zoning out. Don't ever do that. I'm kidding, of course. The next one on this list is body language. Don't let your body language make you look like you're disinterested or zoning out. Lean forward when you're having a conversation with someone. Make eye contact. Do all the things you taught when you were growing up. Those things very much apply in an interview. And believe it or not, bad body language is feedback I hear a lot from interviewers when it doesn't go well. So don't let that happen.
Make sure that you aren't forgetting to sell yourself. You are the product in this interview. A lot of times, maybe shyer people or introverted people will forget and they feel, negative about it. They don't like to brag. They don't want to go on about their achievements, their accomplishments. This is the time to do that. So don't forget to sell yourself. Don't forget to think of yourself as a salesperson would. This is your chance to shine.
So the interview's gone great. You were on time, you answered all the questions, you built rapport, you sold yourself, and then you get to the end and you don't have any questions prepared for the interviewer. That's a terrible mistake because it indicates to them, right or wrong, that you're not that interested in the job. So write down questions prior to the interview and then ask if you could take notes during the interview so you can reference things that come up that you may want to refer back to the end. And at the very least, always ask about the next steps. Try to get as much information as you can from them before you leave about what you can expect going forward and when you should follow up.
And that's a perfect segue into the final tip, which is making sure you follow up after the interview. Something as simple as a thank you email to the manager lets them know that you had a good experience and that you are still interested in the job and gives them your contact information in case they don't have it to reach out directly to you. So make sure you're following up after the interview to let them know that you appreciated it, that you appreciated their time, and that you are still interested in the job.
It's a perfect way to wrap up. And if you don't already have their contact information, make sure you ask for that before you leave so you can get in touch with them without having to search later. So, Peter, that's a lot of tips. I think all of those are very helpful for everyone, whether you're an experienced professional who's interviewed a lot or someone who's brand new on the market. It's a good refresher and can be applied in every scenario. So thanks for listening. Look forward to talking again soon.